But I have a real problem with what we're seeing as the world barrels right directly toward World War III. And then we're going to talk about whether or not this is all being made to happen. Is prophecy being brought about on purpose? Biblical prophecy I'm talking about. Nathan, before that bite from E. Michael Jones about this whole situation, what say you?
I think you brought up a really interesting commandment when it talks about that you shall not kill, you shall not murder. There's a distinction of understanding that is so intoxicating for people. If they've not gotten into bloodlust and blood guilt, they have no idea about the power of what can take over the mind, enrapture the mind when people do seek vengeance. I mean, that's literally what my book was about, was trying to dismantle a life of bloodshed, a life of vengeance, a life of constant confusion. And this is what happens when you enter into the enemy's camp, when you enter into the adversary's kingdom, and you begin to take on the garments of violence. You begin to become something other than a set apart person, a righteous person, because you're going to pick up the sword of Cain. You're going to start to become a murderer. And when you do that, you start to enter into the kingdom of the dragon. He is a murderer and is a murderer from the beginning. He's a liar and a father of lies. And that prince of the power of the air, like he talks about in 2 Corinthians 2:4, like, marvel not, because Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light, and his ministers, his apostles, do likewise. He's like, don't wonder, don't marvel, don't be amazed by their works. And so many people are masquerading as the good guys, as the righteous people who have been so desperately in need of help and protection and deliverance and restoration. And at the same time, behind the scenes, they are the very ones who are enacting murder and bloodshed and violence and control and coercion. And so I really strongly caution people, anytime major cataclysmic events take place, to take a step back from the emotional carnage that's being churned up and reveled in. Like, I don't try to enter into normally weighing into these current events in that same time frame, because people get so emotionally charged, they become completely debased into that animalistic beast-like mindset that they're trying to drive people into. And this is where the propagandists thrive. Like we've talked about almost every episode, Sean, you and I have done. Edward Benet's propaganda. Read a tiny little book. It'll transform your life. You read the book of Revelation, like we're going to talk about tonight. There's an absolute guaranteed promised blessing that you don't lose if you read that book, you guard that book, and that you don't steal from it, take away from it, add to it, or diminish it. And by doing that, you can understand that there really is an adversary, like those principalities, powers, rulers, dominions, thrones, spiritual wickedness in high places. There is an anti-Messiah spirit that has been loosed over the earth to try to lead people astray. It says the dragon leads the whole world astray. And truly, when the world is trying to drive mankind into war, into violence, into death and slaughter, and to the consumption of peace for the expense of prosperity, for the expense of freedom and liberty. This is nothing different than one of the books we're going to talk about tonight, written by a guy named Carl Teichred. We're going to read some excerpts from this about this Unitarianism, this one world ideology that's infecting people, this collectivism that drives people towards this goddess of liberty, who was literally enthroned in Notre Dame Cathedral right before the French had their revolution, which ended up in violence and bloodshed and the slaughtering of innumerable people. When righteous people get caught up in that zealousness, in that passion, in that enthralling, they really are drinking from the cups of demons. And you have to be so cautious about whether or not this is a war of righteousness or a war of carefully orchestrated puppeteers manhandling people to make it appear as though prophecy might be coming to pass, when in reality we have a prophecy of the beast. The revelation of the beast seems to be much more in line with what we see actually being fomented, brought forth, is that unveiling of the archons, these paranumenikai, as they're called in the scriptures, these principalities. And this seems to be their time, the fruit of their anti-Messiah at work.